Welcome along to the Unseen Wisdom. If you're ready to explore the currents beneath the surface of global events, do hit that like button for us.
Yeah, and drop a comment. We really value your insights. Plus, subscribing means you won't miss our future deep dives.
Absolutely. Today, we're turning our focus to Burkina Faso, and specifically its leader, Ibrahim Traoré.
It's a really complex picture. We've sifted through quite a few recent reports, analyses,
Yeah,
trying to get a handle on what's actually happening.
exactly. It feels like a nation really at a crossroads. So our goal today is to, well, unpack the key dynamics based on these sources.
We'll be looking at several things. The threats Traoré is apparently facing, there seem to be many.
Right.
Also, the whole issue around the country's gold reserves, which are significant.
And how that ties into national sovereignty, controlling their own resources?
Precisely. Then there's the geopolitical maneuvering, relationships with France, the U.S., Russia, other African nations.
And inevitably, questions about governance, press freedom. It's all interconnected.
It really is.
And just to reiterate up front, everything we discuss comes directly from the sources we've looked at. We're aiming to understand the different angles, the underlying issues, not push one particular narrative.
Agreed. Presenting the different facets of the story as reported.
Okay, so let's start with just how precarious Traoré's position seems to be. The reports on threats are quite stark, aren't they?
They really are. I mean, the numbers cited are alarming. One source mentions over 25 alleged assassination attempts.
25.
Yeah, since he took power in 2022. Another talks about 39 people wanted in connection with plots. A third mentioned more than 13 separate incidents.
So regardless of the exact figure, the pattern is, well, it's intense. Constant pressure.
Constant pressure seems like an understatement. It paints a picture of extreme volatility.
And it's coming from different directions, not just external enemies.
Apparently so. Some reports point fingers internally, even suggesting his own chief of staff might have been implicated at some point.
Wow.
And then there are the allegations about foreign involvement. Ivory Coast comes up. France is mentioned specifically too.
It creates this really difficult environment, doesn't it? Internal distrust, potentially fueled by external pressures, or maybe vice versa.
Exactly. And we saw a mention of a specific alleged plot, something about $5 million.
Yeah, that led to what the source called a lockdown doctrine.
Right. Increased security, tightening the circle. It shows they perceive these threats as very real, very serious.
And then there was that almost cinematic detail.
Yeah.
The poisoned teacup incident.
Yes, quite something. And a specific name attached a French intelligence officer, apparently, Alexandre Morel, also known as Lacal.
Again, an allegation, but the kind that deeply strains relationships.
Absolutely. Trust evaporates pretty quickly in that kind of atmosphere.
Was there anything else highlighting internal security challenges? Something about a farming report?
Ah, yes. That was interesting. An intercepted report ostensibly about farming, but it apparently contained leaked military secrets.
Leaked by whom?
A Colonel Ouattara was named in the source we saw. It just underscores this challenge of, ensuring loyalty and stopping sensitive information getting out.
Okay, so a backdrop of constant reported threats. Let's shift focus slightly to the resources, particularly gold. Burkina Faso is rich in gold.
Right? Very much so. It's a major part of their economy, their national wealth.
But this has become a point of contention internationally. I saw the comments from U.S. AFRICOM Commander General Langley.
Yes, that was quite direct. Speaking before the U.S. Senate, he essentially accused the Burkina Faso government, Traoré's regime, of exploiting gold reserves.
Exploiting them how?
The accusation was that the gold is being used to prop up the regime, to consolidate Traoré's power, rather than benefiting the actual people of Burkina Faso.
That's a very serious charge coming from a senior U.S. military figure. How did Ouagadougou respond?
Predictably, with strong denials.
Yep.
The government put out statements emphasizing their commitment to fighting corruption. They insist they're managing mining revenues transparently and using them for the population's benefit. They point to reforms, agriculture, water, education, health projects.
So a direct clash of narratives there.
Completely. And it ties into Traoré's broader policy moves regarding gold.
Like wanting to process it domestically.
Exactly. There was the symbolic laying of the foundation stone for a national gold refinery. The stated goal is to stop just exporting raw minerals.
Keep more of the value chain within the country.
That's the idea. There's even been talk, mentioned in some sources, of potentially using gold reserves to back the national currency eventually.
That would be a radical step, challenging the current financial order.
Hugely radical. And, some analyses frame these moves precisely in that light. as a challenge to, well, let's be frank, the historical pattern of Western, particularly European, extraction of Africa's wealth.
This idea that Africa is rich, but Africans remain poor while others profit.
That's a sentiment strongly reflected in some of the sources and commentary surrounding Traoré. They see him trying to break that cycle.
And there was a comparison made, wasn't there, between U.S. deals with, say, Saudi Arabia and potential Burkina deals with Russia.
Yes, one source explicitly raised that, questioning if there's a double standard in how resource deals are viewed depending on who is involved. Is it okay for the U.S. to have certain arrangements, but not for an African nation to explore partnerships with Russia?
It definitely adds another layer of geopolitical complexity to the resource question, which brings us neatly to alliances. Big shifts seem to be happening there.
Oh, absolutely. A very clear pivot away from traditional Western partners, especially France.
The expulsion of French troops was a major signal.
Huge. And then the bans on French media outlets, BBC Africa, Voice of America. It's a deliberate distancing.
And who are they moving towards? Russia and China seem to be the names that keep cropping up.
They do. Reports indicate Burkina Faso is actively strengthening ties with both Moscow and Beijing.
Which, sources say, is causing concern in Washington.
That's certainly the indication, yes.
Sure.
The U.S. is reportedly watching these developing partnerships closely.
And regionally, there's the AES, the Alliance of Sahel States.
Right, formed with Mali and Niger. This is presented, at least by the member states, as a pact for mutual defense and, crucially, for regional sovereignty.
A way to resist external pressures collectively.
That seems to be the core idea. A bloc trying to chart its own course, free from what they perceive as undue foreign interference, whether French or otherwise.
Now, tied into this are some very serious, quite inflammatory allegations mentioned in the sources about Western actions.
Yes, specifically the claim that the West, and France is often singled out here, might be actively supporting jihadist groups.
To what end?
The allegation is that it's a tactic to destabilize Burkina Faso, perhaps as punishment or leverage against Traoré's government for its policy shifts and new alliances.
That's an incredibly explosive claim. Is there proof offered in the sources?
It's crucial to state, no, the sources present this as an allegation, a strong suspicion held in some quarters, particularly those sympathetic to the AES governments. It highlights the extreme lack of trust.
Absolutely. And how does the U.S. travel advisory fit into this picture? Some sources interpret it in a specific way.
Yeah, the level 4 do not travel advisory. One perspective we encountered suggested this could be seen as a form of pressure, perhaps retaliatory.
Retaliation for what? For Burkina Faso pushing back against General Langley's comments, maybe? Or just for cozying up to Russia?
The source suggests possibly both. Again, it's an interpretation, but travel advisories do have real economic and diplomatic impacts, intended or not.
Okay, so the international dimension is clearly fraught with tension. What about the internal situation? Governance, press freedom concerns are being voiced there too?
Yes, alongside the support for Traoré, there are definite criticisms. Allegations of corruption within the government persist in some reports.
And specifically regarding the media, there were arrests.
That's right. 3 journalists arrested during a protest against media restrictions. Significantly, one of them was Wazuma Sanogo, the head of the main journalists association there.
That sends a chilling message, doesn't it? Arresting the leader of the journalists' union.
It certainly does. And it drew widespread condemnation internationally from press freedom groups and Western media. They see it as clear suppression of free speech.
How does the government justify these actions and the media bans we mentioned earlier?
Their counter-narrative is that certain outlets, including some international ones like BBC Africa and VOA, weren't reporting news but spreading propaganda and misinformation.
So they frame it as protecting national security or stability against hostile narratives.
That's essentially, yes.
Yeah.
It's that classic tension.
Yeah.
Where does legitimate reporting end and harmful propaganda begin? Especially in a volatile context. And the government clearly feels some media cross that line.
And the AES, this regional alliance, is trying to build its own media narrative too.
It seems so. They announced plans for a joint communication strategy, including a web TV channel. The stated aim is explicitly to counter what they call external misinformation.
So trying to control the narrative from within the region.
Taking control of the information space seems to be a priority for them, alongside political and military cooperation.
It's important we also touch upon how Traoré himself is viewed by his supporters. The sources suggest he has significant backing.
Yes, definitely. He's often portrayed, especially by supporters, as this young, energetic, Pan-Africanist figure.
Comparisons to Thomas Sankara, even.
Those comparisons are definitely made. Sankara is obviously this iconic, almost mythical figure of revolutionary anti-imperialist leadership in Burkina Faso and beyond. So invoking his name carries huge weight.
And this support isn't just within Burkina Faso.
No. Reports suggest significant popular support in neighboring countries, too, across parts of Africa, where there's a strong desire for more assertive leadership that stands up to external powers.
So for these supporters, how do they view the accusations we discussed, the corruption claims, the press freedom issues, the resource exploitation charges from the U.S.?
Largely, they tend to dismiss them as part of a smear campaign.
A campaign by whom?
By Western interests, primarily France and the U.S., who they believe feel threatened by Traoré's agenda, threatened by his moves to control resources, shift alliances, and assert sovereignty.
So the argument is that because he's challenging the status quo, he's being targeted with these allegations.
That's precisely the perspective presented, and they'd point to the numerous alleged assassination plots as evidence that external forces are actively trying to remove him.
Which leads to the sentiment that he needs to be protected.
Yes. Strong feeling among supporters that Traoré, and by extension Burkina Faso's current path, needs defending against these destabilizing efforts, perceived or real.
Wow. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here. It really underscores the complexity.
It really does.
Just to briefly recap then, we've got a leader, Ibrahim Traoré, facing apparently numerous and serious threats, both internal and external. We have major controversy around the nation's gold accusations of misuse versus government denials and bold moves towards national control and domestic processing.
A clear assertion of economic sovereignty being attempted.
Then the big geopolitical shifts, pulling away from France, building ties with Russia and China, forming the AES regional bloc.
All while facing those serious allegations, like Western support for jihadists, which, again, are unproven but reflect deep mistrust.
And internally, this debate rages over governance, corruption, and particularly press freedom, with arrests and media bans on one side and government claims of fighting misinformation on the other.
And all underpinned by these sharply contrasting views of Traoré himself. Is he a Pan-Africanist hero challenging neocolonialism, or a leader suppressing dissent and mismanaging resources? The sources offer evidence for multiple interpretations.
It's definitely not a simple black and white situation. The picture emerging from the reports is incredibly multifaceted.
Absolutely. Many competing interests, narratives, and pressures all colliding in Burkina Faso right now.
So as we wrap up this deep dive on the unseen wisdom, perhaps here's something to reflect on. We see this pattern across history, right? Resource-rich African nations, legacies of foreign intervention. How does a nation like Burkina Faso navigate that? How do you balance asserting your sovereignty, controlling your own wealth, choosing your own partners?
With the need for stability, for development, for navigating the existing international system, however flawed it might seem.
Exactly. And what role, if any, should outside powers play? Is genuine partnership possible without dominance? Or is interference in some form almost inevitable given the stakes?
These aren't easy questions. There are no simple answers, but understanding the dynamics in places like Burkina Faso is, I think, essential to grasping the larger shifts happening globally.
We hope this exploration has given you some food for thought. Thanks for joining us here on The Unseen Wisdom.
We really appreciate you tuning in.
Please do remember to like, comment with your own perspectives, and subscribe so you can join us for our next exploration into the unseen forces shaping our world.